There is a plane flying right now that could, if necessary, run a war. It can refuel in midair, stay aloft for days, communicate with any leader on Earth through encrypted satellite links, and withstand conditions that would knock every other aircraft out of the sky. Most people know it as Air Force One. Almost nobody knows what it actually is. Let's start with what the name even means. Air Force One is not a specific aircraft. It is a call sign, a radio designation used by any U.S. Air Force plane the moment the president steps on board. The moment he lands or transfers to a different aircraft, that call sign disappears. The reason this designation exists at all traces back to 1953, when President Eisenhower's plane briefly shared a call sign with a commercial airliner in the same airspace. Air traffic controllers could not tell them apart. After that near miss, the military created a permanent dedicated call sign, Air Force One, for the president and the president alone. But the story of a presidential aircraft goes back even further, to the middle of the Second World War. In 1943, Franklin Roosevelt's advisors grew increasingly uneasy about the idea of the commander-in-chief crossing the Atlantic on a commercial ocean liner, especially with German U-boats prowling the deep. The solution was a Boeing 314 flying boat called the Dixie Clipper. Roosevelt boarded it and crossed the Atlantic to attend a secret summit in Casablanca, Morocco, making him the first sitting U.S. president to travel by air. It was not glamorous. It was not fast. But it worked, and it set a precedent that has never been reversed. The modern version of Air Force One, the aircraft most people picture, is actually two planes, both designated VC-25A, based on the Boeing 747-200B airframe. They entered service in the early 1990s and have carried 6 presidents since. The numbers that describe them are genuinely impressive: a cruising speed of around 630 miles per hour, a service ceiling of roughly 45,000 feet, and a range of approximately 7,800 miles. In an emergency, both aircraft are equipped for aerial refueling, which means, in theory, they never have to land at all. Step inside, and the scale of the operation becomes clearer. The interior spans around 4,000 square feet across 3 levels, roughly the footprint of a large family home, compressed into a fuselage. The lower level holds cargo and equipment. The upper level houses the cockpit and crew quarters. The main deck is where most of the work happens. At the front of the main deck sits the president's private suite, a full office, a private bathroom, and a conference room capable of hosting a serious meeting at 40,000 feet. After the September 11th attacks, the communications suite was upgraded so the president could address the nation directly from the air, a capability that became relevant almost immediately. On that same day in 2001, President George W. Bush used Air Force One as a mobile command center for several hours while the government assessed the threat and confirmed it was safe to return to Washington. The plane was not just transportation, it was the nerve center of the executive branch during the most chaotic hours the country had seen in decades. That is not an accident. That is exactly what it was designed to be. Beyond the president's suite, the main deck includes a medical facility staffed by a physician at all times, stocked with blood supplies and medication, and capable of performing minor surgical procedures. There are rest areas for senior staff, communications officers, and security personnel. Reporters travel in the rear section, and their seats are not free. News organizations pay the government for their spots, at a rate set per seat. Food is handled with the same level of security as everything else. The 2 onboard galleys can prepare meals for close to 100 people simultaneously, but the food itself is never prepared on the aircraft. It is cooked, sealed, and frozen at a secure kitchen at Joint Base Andrews in Maryland, then loaded onto the plane and reheated once airborne. Nothing edible boards that aircraft without being tracked and verified. The history that has unfolded inside this aircraft is remarkable. On November 22, 1963, Vice President Lyndon Johnson was sworn in as president aboard Air Force One at Dallas Love Field, just hours after John F. Kennedy was assassinated. Johnson remains the only U.S. president ever to have taken the oath of office on an aircraft. In 1974, Richard Nixon boarded Air Force One as president, and somewhere over the American Midwest, as his resignation took effect, the call sign changed. The plane became SAM 27000. Nixon landed in California as a private citizen. A presidency ended, quietly, at cruising altitude. In 2016, Air Force One landed in Havana, the first time an American president had visited Cuba in 88 years. The moment the wheels touched Cuban soil, something shifted. Decades of Cold War hostility had not exactly ended, but they had softened into something that at least looked like a beginning. In February 2023, the mission profile was different entirely. President Biden boarded Air Force One under cover of darkness, with minimal staff and an unusually small press pool. The plane landed in Poland. Then, using a combination of ground transport and careful coordination with Ukrainian authorities, Biden traveled into Kiev, making him the first American president to visit Ukraine. It was one of the most logistically complex and operationally secretive missions Air Force One had ever flown. The aircraft's appearance is no accident either. The iconic blue and white livery was designed by the industrial designer Raymond Loewy at the request of President Kennedy in the early 1960s. Loewy's team chose a restrained palette, sky blue on the lower fuselage fading to white on top, clean lines, the presidential seal, and the words United States of America in block capitals along the side. No oversized flags. No excess. The design has been widely imitated by other nations for their own state aircraft and remains one of the